Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thank you for sticking me in your ear. On this episode, we are going to go on a thrilling journey across the wilds of the Lone Star State, one of my favorite places, the great state, the great republic of Texas, where true tales of the Texas Bigfoot may surprise you and even shock you. They say, of course, that everything is bigger in Texas, and if so, this may well be the state's biggest and most unexpected mystery of all. The new book by Lyle Blackburn is called Texas Bigfoot: History, Legends, and Modern Encounters in the Lone Star State. And of course, we know Lyle from Coast to Coast in this program. Lyle is a native Texan known for his work in writing, music, and film, and is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek and Sinister Swamps, whose subject matter reflects his lifelong fascination with legendary creatures and strange phenomenon. He's also the founder of the rock band Ghoultown and a narrator, producer of the documentary films such as The Mothman of Point Pleasant and Boggy Creek Monster. And a great pleasure to welcome back Lyle Blackburn. Hey, Lyle, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I almost forgot your wonderful podcast, Blackburn's Monstro Bizarro. First of all, how do we listen?
Well, it's on most, wherever you get your finer podcasts. You can get it on Spotify and Apple and all those places.
Fantastic. All right. So, Texas Bigfoot. How far back do we have reportings of Bigfoot in Texas?
They go back pretty far. If go back to when there was reports of so-called wild men or wild women, and in fact, there was a story from around 1836 called "The Wild Woman of the Navidad," in which residents in and around the small town of Hallettsville along the Navidad River in East Texas began reporting that they were seeing what looked like strange human-like footprints coming out of the woods, a couple of sets of those, and then eventually spotted an upright, hair-covered person or creature that in the nomenclature of the time, wild man was sort of the equivalent of Bigfoot. So they proceeded to encounter this entity over a period of 8 or 9 years, and hunting parties tried to lasso it and capture it, and it ran off, and they never could catch it. So that's kind of the earliest tale on record. And then there's others from the late 1800s that talk about similar things that we could perceive as possible Bigfoot. So it's pretty early, and like most places in the U.S., those kind of tales exist.
And is it true, as they say, everything is bigger in Texas? Is Bigfoot reportedly bigger in Texas? What sizes are we talking about?
Well, it's actually just sort of the ubiquitous size reports, anywhere from 6 to 7 feet tall is the average. Of course, sometimes you get 8 or 9 feet tall reports, or juveniles that are smaller, but kind of consistent with everything else.
Any other distinctions separating it from Bigfoot in Florida or the Pacific Northwest or the Appalachia?
Some of the reports detail a more aggressive creature. Sometimes it will bluff, charge, or threaten, or appear very ominous in a way. Some of them are described as being more hairy, or more unkempt, I think, than some of the reports in the Pacific Northwest, for example. And even some of them are somewhat like the whole vibe of the skunk ape or swamp ape, where they're a little more ape-like. But I find in general that just there's not a very good consistency to the sightings. And of course, these things can be brief and quick and unexpected, so naturally so, where you're not there to examine. But I find that Texas is kind of a surprising place for Bigfoot, but what we do have here fits very well within, the realm of other Bigfoot reports.
Well, Texas is so. This is one of the reasons I love Texas. It's like its own separate country, and it's different, wildly different terrains. You've got desert, you've got mountains, you've got heavily forested areas, you've got swamps. Um, so are Bigfoot sighted, or have Bigfoot been seen in all of these various areas, or are there clusters like in the forest areas or in the swamps, or maybe are they seen in the deserts?
Well, there are sightings in the more unexpected terrain, and of course, people who've driven through Texas and so forth realize there's a lot more to the ecology and landscape than sort of that cowboy motif. And certainly there's the central portion of Texas is a little bit more wide open, clumps of trees and all that. And then as you go west towards New Mexico, it does get very arid and more desert like. The eastern portion, which is probably a third of the state, is known as the Piney Woods, and that's very heavily forested, pine forest, hardwood habitat, and even some swamps, which is kind of surprising for Texas. The majority of the sightings would be clustered in the piney woods or in those swampy areas. But there's a pretty good history of sightings and some notable newspaper reports from the central portion of the state. And on occasion, there's even sightings like in the Panhandle, which is very open, and all the way over to El Paso, which is very, very much a desert-like terrain. So as I researched this over the years, I was surprised of how many reports there were in places we wouldn't normally associate as, with Bigfoot or Bigfoot habitat.
Coloration, black, reddish brown, all of the above.
Typically, brown to dark brown to black. I mean, that would be probably 95% of it, but you do have other colors, occasionally the reddish or blondish gray. And there's been some even famous cases, such as the Lake Worth monster case of the 1960s, where people reported a white-haired creature of some sort, which occasionally you get that. But that was one of the most famous tales from 1969, actually near Fort Worth, Texas, near Lake Worth, and I was born in Fort Worth, of this creature that was again very aggressive and approaching people in an area which was in and around Lake Worth, was kind of a lover's lane hangout, very wooded area back then. Even though it was close to the Dallas Fort Worth area, there was no significant development out there at the time. And this was covered in the Fort Worth Star Telegram papers and so forth, and kind of became a very well noted local legend. And in that case, people said the creature had white hair.
Wow, I've got a white-haired, well, he's a yeti behind me, I guess, an abominable snowman, but which would make sense, in the Himalayas, it blend in with the snow. But a white Bigfoot in the Fort Worth, Dallas Fort Worth area, that would stick out like a sore thumb. Do you think was it an albino?
Well, it's possible. I mean, and if we kind of consider these creatures to be anything like we are, of course, there's so many variations in hair color among humans, and even, albino, people's hair turns white. I mean, these kind of things. So it's conceivable that a creature like that could have the same condition, or could be older, perhaps. And one thing I noted about that is that that was kind of famous in the papers and everything. But over the years, I've come across a few witnesses who would tell me that they had seen something similar, or perhaps their father. One woman said that her father had seen something about uh, 10 years prior in a location that's pretty close to Lake Worth. And he described seeing something that he said looked like a white ape. And of course, this would have been in the 50s where there was kind of no concept of Bigfoot here in Texas. Absolutely. For him to even say he had seen something like a white ape was very odd. And so when the woman told me that, I was like, well, there you go. It's kind of like where you find one cluster or sort of a famous flap of sightings, there's always more possibly that weren't reported or wasn't on record that kind of corroborates it.
Any photographic evidence from the Lake Worth monster?
There actually is. There was November 19th, 1969, a resident by the name of Alan Plaster was driving along Shoreline Drive there near Lake Worth when something popped up just on the side of the road in the trees. And he had a Polaroid camera and had the wherewithal to somehow get a picture. And this, it's sort of like a bit of a ubiquitous blob squatch because the thing was moving, whatever it was, and it looks a bit fuzzy or cloudy, but you can definitely see a white, upright something there. And he's been interviewed by the Fort Worth Star Telegram paper and others over the years, and just stood behind the fact that something stood up over there. He took a photo, so I don't believe it was a hoax or something he created or purported. He was lucky enough to get the photo. And if you consider that photo being in 1969, that's kind of one of the earliest and kind of one of the best Bigfoot type creature photos that exist, certainly of that time.
Just 2 years after the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What about newspaper accounts from, I don't know, the 19th century or early 20th century? Any accounts of ranchers complaining about livestock being attacked or eaten by a Bigfoot?
You do get that. I don't have any really good newspaper articles that talked about any significant amount of that. Sometimes that would be mentioned in relation to people seeing some strange creature, and maybe they would say, "Well, yeah, one of my cattle disappeared," but there wasn't anything that was, major. No sort of chupacabra thing where you'd find numerous livestock killed for no reason. So I think it was just one of these things where people would cite something and then they would kind of conjecture that other things may or may not be related.
Um, they've been known to take down a deer, chase deer, um, and any reports like that. Well, they have deer in Texas, but they also have antelope and things like that. Any of those types of reports?
Uh, yeah, there's often reports of where people say they've either found deer carcasses or they have seen the creature, um, presumably chasing a deer. There was a really good report where I talked to a witness or a guy involved where uh, one afternoon he heard his hogs squealing in his pen and looked out the window and saw this 7 foot tall, hair covered thing standing on two legs, reaching over and literally grabbing one of those hogs, picking it up right over the fence. And he just didn't even know what to think. And this was back in the 1980s. And he of course goes to grab his gun and go out there, and this thing took off running and dropped that hog. But he said those hogs were, lively animals and not something to be trifled with. And this thing was just literally picking that heavy thing up and about to pull it over the fence. And therein, a few other guys showed up and they found, 5-toed footprints where the thing had been standing, and then proceeded to talk to some of the neighbors who had also said they had seen weird footprints around their house. And even one of the universities in East Texas came out and cast the track. There's a picture in my book, which is quite a good looking track. And so therein, you have a witness literally seeing one of these things, picking up a livestock.
Any reports of missing people or people who claim to have been kidnapped or taken by a Bigfoot?
No, I didn't come across any of that. I mean, you've got those kind of classic tales out of the Pacific Northwest where you have kind of the kidnappings and things. Uh, nothing in Texas, or of anything like that. I mean, you got a lot of shooting at them type incidents, which I guess it seems cowboy-like, a response that may be very stereotypical Texan, but no abductions.
Anyone claim to have hit Bigfoot, maybe injured or killed a Bigfoot?
There was a story, in fact, and this was kind of made famous on Coast to Coast back when Art Bell was the host, but a gentleman calling himself Bugs called in and said he had actually shot and killed one of these creatures. And this had occurred in the panhandle of Texas, so up in the northern part, where again, that's a place it's very wide open and not a place where you think these creatures would even be sighted. Uh, perhaps they could be passing through, but anyway, he said one evening they spotted this creature, and at first they took it to be a bear, but as it got closer, they could see it was not and fit the description of a Bigfoot, and for whatever reason, the guy shot it, and it was injured enough to where it crawled off into what he said was sort of this brush where they had built sort of a presumably a house or a shelter, and he went after it and crawled up in there, and there he was confronted by a second one, presumably the mate, and the other one was, he could see, was deceased, and then he shot at that one, and killed these Bigfoots, and then supposedly buried them along this creek. And he had called into Coast to Coast and talked about this a couple of times, and of course this became big news, and a lot of people were trying to figure out where it was because he wasn't giving away the exact location. And not surprisingly, the bodies were never found. The guy never really revealed that, and it remains kind of a mystery, but interesting that somebody would report killing some, and then just that whole case was strange.
Any what about law enforcement or the Texas Rangers? Do they have any encounters, any stories to share?
There's a few, and if you can get some of these, well, park rangers and other guys to kind of off the record talk about it, but there's a newspaper report, in fact, from the southeast portion of the Piney Woods in Texas, where a woman called the police, all panicked, and said someone was trying to break into her house through the back door. And the police responded. Several officers went out there, and of course, presuming this was a human, they could see where somebody tried to get in, and it looked like he or she had ransacked this woman's porch entryway in the back. And as they were kind of looking around, suddenly they caught sight of this big, hairy, upright figure running from the house area towards the woods. And several of these police officers saw it, and they kind of pursued it a little bit away into the woods before they became uncomfortable. But this again was on record, and they said they they didn't have a heart to tell the lady that they had seen this. They just said they had taken care of the problem, and they didn't think that the perpetrator would be back. But that was an interesting story, and again, one where you would find credibility if it's being reported by law enforcement.
Absolutely. Texas Bigfoot, history, legends, and modern encounters in the Lone Star State. Lyle Blackburn stays with us, back with more of our conversation in 2 minutes. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Hey there, welcome to another edition of Strange Planet, and it is a strange planet indeed. And if you'd like to get deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to think about becoming a premium subscriber. Just go to strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. There are a number of monthly tiers that you can choose from. Pick the one that's right for you. All right. In March 2003, U.S. forces invaded Iraq, vowing to destroy Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. Remember that? WMDs. And end the dictatorial rule of Saddam Hussein. When WMD intelligence proved illusory and a violent insurgency arose, the war lost public support. Saddam was captured, he was tried, he was hanged, and democratic elections were held. In the years since, there have been over 5,000 U.S. and allied troop deaths, and more than, well, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians have been killed. Meanwhile, of course, questions continue to linger over Iraq's fractious political situation. So they weren't there for WMDs. There were no WMDs. Or was there? Or was there a particular weapon of mass destruction we've not heard about before? That's where we are headed over the next 45 minutes or so. Mark A. Carpenter is with us once again. He's an anthropologist, an explorer, author, and a messenger of misfortune. He sacrificed a career as a college professor and archaeologist to bring his research directly to the people. And he set out to unlock the mysteries of the pyramids, which, what he found, was corrupt science, secret cults, and validation of ancient tradition. Mark Carpenter, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well, Richard. How you doing?
Very well. So, if people heard our recent show on Coast to Coast, we got into this towards the tail end of our 2-hour conversation, and it's a pretty wild story. Let's see. Shall we begin in 2003 in March? And again, the claim that they were in there because they feared that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, yellow cake, enriched uranium. He was going to make nuclear weapons and so forth. Of course, I don't know that too many people bought that. Enough people did, I suppose. But that again, the intelligence proved illusory. There were no WMDs, but well, you say there was a particular weapon of mass destruction. So let's. How do you want to get into this? How do we start?
Well, so where this began for me, while they were gearing up for that invasion, I was unaware of the details of what we'll get into, but I was on my own parallel journey. I had recently returned from my studies in Mexico, and I had my paradigm shattered. I grew up in a very secular paradigm, very science oriented. My father, a military aerospace engineer, and but what I found in Mexico gave me pause and made me reconsider what is real and what is not. And that led me, and to be specific, I found a certain degree of validation of ancient tradition, specifically the biblical tradition. And anybody who's seen our previous episodes together will have some idea. But for those who haven't, gigantic ruling elites in prehistory with extra toes and fingers. Obviously, some high sophistication in terms of megalithic engineering, and most specifically was this high stratification between these demigod ruling elites, the gigantic six-fingered people mentioned in the Bible, Nephilim descendants. So I've found hard archaeological evidence of that. And these ruling elites, it seemed, were imposing on the native people, like the Maya, a dragon cult that demanded blood sacrifice. And that triggered a really powerful interest in the book of Revelation. And so that's really where this begins for me. Upon returning home and learning what I had learned, I immersed myself in the book of Revelation. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew that this prophecy had a lot more legitimacy to it than I had previously realized. I had studied it before very briefly as, just more in the interest of narratology, like why do people, believe what they believe and how it affects human behavior. But that's really where it began for me.
So you're in the Valley of Mexico. You're studying these pyramids from the Maya civilization. That leads you to an exploration of basically end times prophecy.
Exactly. What specifically caught my attention was this prophecy of the Antichrist and him imposing dragon worship, satanic dragon worship upon the whole world. And so that triggered to me, well, if these, if this race of Nephilim descendants imposes satanic dragon demonic worship onto the common people, that seems to be what's predicted by the Revelation prophecy. And so I dove into it head first, even to an obsessive degree. I really shut myself off, almost like a modern day hermit. I really immersed myself deeply in it, but I really couldn't get anywhere. And it was really taking a toll on my life and my work and my studies. I'm just like obsessively looking for clues, and I really couldn't find any. And then spring of that year, almost exactly to the day, I believe it was the day of April 20th, I had a dream. And I know people listening to that might think, oh, a dream is just a dream. And that was certainly what I thought at the time too. I had this very strange dream and I immediately dismissed it because it's just a dream, right?
When you say of that same year, we're talking April 2003?
April 20, 2003.
Right.
Right then, I had a dream, and it unlocked for me. It yielded a single clue. Now that clue took me I didn't put it together immediately. It took me years, but the dream stuck with me because it was so strange and so unlike dreams I normally have. It stuck with me, and I continued on my way researching these things. But eventually, I put together what that dream meant, and it was a clue that unlocked the Revelation prophecy, specifically the mystery kings aspect of the prophecy.
The Mystery Kings. Now, are we talking about the 10 kings that are represented by what, the 10 horns on the dragon's head?
That it leads into that part. The prophecy is complex and highly stylized, and it is very confusing, and that's why theologians and religious scholars and clergymen and just secular researchers have been studying it for millennia.
Which is the exact reason I think I'm Greek Orthodox. The Orthodox Church, that's the one book in the Bible that they do not read from during liturgy, just because it is so open to interpretation. They stay away from it.
That's right. We're probably talking about the most enigmatic book in Western history. Hmm. Well, enigmatic and influential, being that it's a book of the Bible. And so, what are the Mystery Kings? The Mystery Kings actually come before the Horn Kings that you mentioned. Hmm. Those are kings that are all future to come. The author of Revelation is this mysterious fellow, John of Patmos, who is apparently imprisoned on an island, Patmos, for being a Christian. So this is during the reign of Nero, mm-hmm. and Nero has outlawed Christianity and has sent them to this prison camp on Patmos, which we can only imagine was an absolutely horrible, agonizing, and miserable existence. Okay, so John of Patmos describes a series of Antichrist kings throughout history, not an immediate sequence, but over thousands of years. And the Mystery Kings have a very specific characteristics. So they are tyrannical rulers of an empire. They demand by state decree some degree of reverence or worship. In other words, they portray themselves as god kings or messianic figures. And by law of their nation, you must acknowledge this. And they declare war on God in different ways. The dream, I have a hard time talking about it because it's so strange, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But I think it's important. I've been sitting on this for a long time, and given the state of the world today and what I know, I feel an obligation. So I'm going to tell you about the dream.
Just before you do, just a quick
Sure.
further clarification. John of Patmos is believed to have been John the Apostle, so he would have been one of Christ's disciples.
Well, that's I would say that's up for debate. Okay. Yes, you're correct. There are factions of scholars on both sides.
Okay.
There are factions who say that he's John the Apostle, and then there is another faction that says he is a mysterious guy who was. We really don't know, and I'm not proclaiming one way or the other.
All right.
What I know is there's some authenticity to not some. This prophecy is authentic. That's what I've come to learn. But you're right. His identity is very mysterious.
Okay, so back to the 10 kings.
Sure. So in the dream, this was unlike any dream I had. In most dreams, like I would say most people's dreams, I'm in control. I'm walking around. I'm interacting with people. But in this dream, I had no control. And I had no physical body. It was like I was just a phantom or a fly on the wall, and it was as if I was riding a roller coaster of spectacle. So I had no control. I was just along for the ride, an observer. And I was in a very opulent castle, study, like a medieval castle study, really magnificent. Oil paintings and tapestries and a grand fireplace, fabulous antiquities, a globe, a really opulent globe. And but it was not positive. There was a really strong negative vibe. You know, you ever have that feeling when you're in the room with someone who's like scared or dangerous and you just don't feel comfortable? That was the feeling I got. It was very uncomfortable and very unsettling, and I didn't feel safe. And I'm going around this study, and I would come to a really big, long dining table, and on the table is a map of the world, specifically Asia and Eurasia and Europe. And the map is covered in little military game pieces. And I finally see a man, and he's hunched over the map, and he has a cup of china cup of tea and a saucer. And I can't make out who he is because he's hunched over, and he's tapping the table. And I'm getting closer to him against my will. I don't want to get anywhere near him. He's radiating fear and desperation. And we get near to him, and I see his cup of tea, and I notice it has a swastika on it. And it's even in the dream, it starts to dawn on me who this man is. And he lifts up his head, and sure enough, it is Adolf Hitler. And he is tapping the Eurasian section of the map. And he looks at me, his eyes are bloodshot. He has terrible bags under his eyes, like he hasn't slept in a month. And I didn't think he was aware of my presence, but suddenly I realize he is. And he's looking at me with this dreadful look. And he seems to be saying, look at this spot on the map. And that's it. And I wake up. And like I said, you know, I'm a guy who researches history, the dark side of history. And I dismissed it, you know, strange dream about Adolf Hitler, you know. Mm-hmm. And I must clarify, I am no fan of Adolf Hitler's. This is not a glorification of the tyrannical megalomaniac Adolf Hitler, not remotely. Please, nobody give that a second thought. And I know this is difficult to believe, but if you bear with me, I have scientific evidence to validate everything I say, except for that dream. Now, what on earth, Mark, does this have to do with the Revelation prophecy? In a word, everything. So years later, I'm still studying this prophecy, trying to understand it. And it dawns on me, Revelation, and keep in mind, at this time, I'm desperate for this clue. After that period, I really backed off of studying the prophecy because it nearly consumed me. But in Revelation 17, in discussing the Mystery Kings, let me find the exact quote. I don't want to get it wrong at all. Okay, here we are. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must only remain for a little while. Now, there's more to it, but let's stop there because that's where the clue unlocks. So John, whether he's the apostle or Patmos, mm-hmm. He's saying that 5 of these kings have already lived, reigned, and died.
Right.
And he's saying 1 exists currently. And then he says, so currently in his time, which is 2,000 years ago. And then he says, one is to come, but must remain for only a little while. Well, that is Adolf Hitler. And that is Adolf Hitler. And the dream reveals it, because how could this man, John, have known that this Antichrist figure would arise? The very next Antichrist figure would arise and then only reign for a short while. Hitler's war against God was very brief, because he was only in power for a decade or so. But he was regarded as a nationally required messianic figure.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously, right, he genocided the Jewish people, and he was reinstituting a sort of neo-pagan Nordic faith amongst the German people, which makes him fit the qualifications of an Antichrist king.
Right.
And presumably the one that was Nero, because Nero too he ruled over the Roman Empire, and he demanded worship as a descendant of Jupiter, the Roman Zeus. Mm-hmm. And he outlawed Christianity and slaughtered countless of them and enslaved others.
Yeah, there was also Domitian, the Roman Emperor Domitian.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I have not identified all seven, but those two fit perfectly, and another fits perfectly, and that's where we're going with Iraq in the WMDs.
Okay. All right. So let me take a quick time out. We'll come back.
Sure.
And sure. We'll talk about something as well that was happening just, I guess, prior to the Iraq invasion, involving some other archaeologists of coincidentally German descent, back with or German heritage. Let's take a time out. Back with more of my conversation with Mark A. Carpenter. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. And welcome once again to Strange Planet. Great to have you here. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. I just finished a podcast. It was kind of the second of 2 parts. A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a flat earther, David Weiss, Flat Earth Dave. Seems like a nice fellow. Had a great sort of multimedia presentation. Anyway, so I just finished with part 2, which was with a gentleman by the name of Mike Toon, who came on to debunk Dave Weiss, kind of point by point. But that flat earth subject is, in this arena where we delve into conspiracies and the paranormal and the unexplained, there are like 3, in the pantheon, I would say, there are 3 big subjects. One is flat earth. One, of course, is JFK, the assassination. And the other one is this legend that Paul McCartney died in a car crash back in November of 1966 after storming out of a recording session for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And it's amazing that that legend, absent the internet, took root and just spread like wildfire, beginning in about 1969 with a call to a Detroit area radio DJ. And it's still with us. It has continues to capture the imagination of millions of Beatle fans. And my good friend, Don Jeffries, has just waded into these waters as well. He's got a brand new book, and it's called From Strawberry Fields to Abbey Road, a Billy Shear story, co-authored by Bob Wilson. And even I was honored to be asked to contribute a chapter. Don Jeffries, welcome once again. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Richard, it's always great to talk with you.
So what led you to enter the fray? I mean, this, like the flat earthers and like JFK and like the UFO community, I mean, it can get very, very contentious and heated. I mean, if you don't sort of sing from the same choir book, I mean, you can be shunned and ostracized and sometimes even threatened with bodily harm.
Well, this book it's really Bob Wilson's idea. Bob Wilson, is a huge Beatles fan, and excuse me, he used to have a Beatles podcast. He still has one off and on. He's looking for a new home for that. He knows a lot of these people. He's interviewed people with wings and things like that. So this was his baby. And of course, I'm a huge Beatles fan as well. I know much more about the Beatles than the average person, but I've met a lot of people doing this who I can't I can't compete with, because there's people like Jude Kessler I was talking with last night that is writing like a 9-part series on John Lennon, and every book is about 1,000 pages. I mean, she's basically
She wrote the foreword. She wrote the foreward to them.
Yes, she did.
She's a brilliant writer.
Yes, she is, and she's. But those are the kind of people that get involved in this. They take what I love the Beatles, and I never get tired of watching them, especially because they were a visual group as well as they just had that look, and it was a unique look. They're still fun to look at, and they had the charisma of the Marx Brothers. So Hard Day's Night is still a wonderful film to watch. So I never grow tired of that, but I can't compete with some of this minutia. And so the idea was, because just to, I'm not giving away any secrets, but neither Bob or I believe that Paul is dead. I mean, I don't want to put any spoilers out, but I put the evidence in there in the part I wrote, just to show why maybe some people think this. And then there are a lot of questions there, that really make you think. And even the origin of where exactly did this come from? And certainly I've always wondered, in just analyzing the Beatles. Now, John has always been, my favorite Beatle by far. And I kind of am not as interested in McCartney. I kind of looked at him as a lightweight, especially in his solo career. So I'm receptive to something like that if somebody tells me, because I think, well, yeah, God, he did put some really, stuff that I don't think was up to par as a solo artist. So could this have been a different person? But then you get into, how do you find somebody that looks exactly like him, that can sing exactly like him, can write songs, and whoever, if McCartney was replaced, the new guy wrote, A Long and Winding Road, and, people, things like that I think are incredible pieces of work. So, left-handed bass player, is this, you're getting into, areas of infinitesimal possibilities. So, but again, I'm open-minded. So I thought it would be interesting. And to be honest with, so that's why we asked a bunch of celebrities, and people can see what they think. And, I have my little contingent of people like Susan Olsen from the Brady Bunch, played Cindy, and Sally Kirkland, and actress, and Bob Has Wings people. And we had somebody from the Love and Spoonful, and people like yourself, just a lot of people. John Barber, of course, our friend, and just to give their opinions on it, where they found out about it, and what they think of the Beatles in general.
Did anyone, I mean, I've read most of it, but I don't recall, did anybody actually believe that McCartney might be A replacement?
Well, I don't want to give that away, but
Okay.
I did get someone to present the other side, and there was at least one other person that was on the fence.
Hmm.
Okay, but yeah, you're right. The vast majority of it kind of well, I guess, especially in that celebrity world, most celebrities are really into groupthink. You know how that is, and so that's kind of especially if you're anyway associated with the music business, to come out and say that McCartney was replaced. That's a pretty bold move to make. So and we had to be careful because I know the Beatles are litigious, and so I'm not saying like when I talk about anything, I don't know anything, but I think it's pretty obvious if you read my thoughts what I think about it.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty well. I'm not going to tell any tales out of school. I mean, I've talked about this on the program before, and like you, the idea that that they managed to find someone as talented. I mean, I actually would differ a little bit. I think some of his solo work, particularly an album like Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, which came out in 2005, I think is almost as good as anything he did. Say later stages of the Beatles. I don't know if you've heard that album, but
No, I haven't heard.
it's terrific. So for them to be able to find a left-handed bass player, I'm glad you mentioned that because that gets overlooked.
Yeah.
Who looked enough like him to pass, and who was still able to, was an absolute tunesmith. It's a pretty tall order. What's fascinating though, because I do love to talk about it, even though I don't buy into it. But it's a wonderful parlor game, and everyone likes to look for clues and things like that. Yep. But it's almost an interesting sociological, psychological study of how something like this has endured, but even more so, as I said in the introduction, how it began in the absence of the internet. It's very difficult to start a rumor, and have it live on. Talk to me a little bit about that. What do you think was at work there?
Well, yeah, I think it was, I don't know how these things got started in those days, but I was a little kid, and I remember suddenly, like one day, I was at PE or something, and one of the boys, who was kind of a popular kid, just started talking about this, and I had never heard it, but it just kind of spread like wildfire, very briefly, a week or so, and that's pretty much the way it was. It really took hold quickly. They had radio shows about it and everything, but now, of course, now it endures decades later. But I think that's because, and I don't know where that kid heard it from. I don't know where. I suspect maybe he read an article or heard it on a radio show, because the one thing I think that I don't think can be denied, both Bob and I both think the clues are there. There are clues there, and
Yes.
I know the Beatles would deny it. So I'm not saying that the Beatles, but I don't know who put the clues there. But to me, I think it's pretty obvious. I just give you one example that McCartney, I think when it was they were how was it, When I'm 64, there's a video for one of the songs, I think, in Magical Mystery Tour, and McCartney has a black rose.
Yes.
And all the rest of them had red roses. And he later, it was addressed later, and they said, well, it's because we ran out of red roses. But the problem is, you can see as they're walking around, McCartney and all of them were throwing all these roses all around everywhere. They had tons of extra roses. So I don't think that explanation holds pat. The same thing for the famous Abbey Road cover.
Yes.
When McCartney is, for those not familiar, it's McCartney is supposed to be the corpse because he's not wearing shoes, and Lennon's supposed to be the preacher, and George is the grave digger, and I guess Ringo the audience or something. I don't know, or something like that. But McCartney, obviously, the focus is on him. But he actually addressed it later, and his explanation makes no sense because he said, I was wearing sandals and it was really hot that day. So you took off your sandals so the road, the asphalt would burn your feet more. I mean, so I don't know if they were playing into it by doing that, and people grasp hold of that. And you have people, Lennon himself, especially, who was vehemently, denied it a couple times and said, this is ridiculous, how stupid, people believing this stuff. But then he played around with the fans too, in Glass Onion, where he says, here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul. So he's still throwing that out there.
Right.
So I don't, and also, and How Do You Sleep, and his attack on McCartney, he says those freaks was right when they said you were dead. So he's still, he's kind of poking fun at it, but he's still mentioning it. So I think that for whatever reason, maybe it was a public relations thing, but it sure worked as a kid. I can tell you, because at that point I was little and I'd kind of gotten over because I wasn't sophisticated musically enough. But I still love the early Beatles. That's Beatlemania. That's what I love still. But the pop stuff. But they'd kind of gotten out of it, so I had kind of stopped buying their records as because I was still a little kid. So, but that rejuvenated my interest hearing this. So if it was a public relation campaign, it worked with me. I don't know how many others.
It worked indeed. Well, the fact that we really can't definitively pin down how it started, and as I mentioned, without the internet, unless you have like the machine behind you feeding that, it's hard to imagine how that would have endured. I mean, there are some rumors that somebody wrote about it in well, I don't know if it's a rumor. It's actually, I think it was true. It was written about in one of the, a college newspaper, I think in Iowa.
Yes.
Someone penned an article on it. And then, but that person claims, well, but it wasn't my work. It was based on something that someone else told me that he heard out on the West Coast. And it's like you mentioned the glass onion. It's like an onion. You start peeling away the layers and there's just layers. There's no onion.
Well, and one of the people we talked to was Fred LaBeouf, that Bob talked to, who is generally given credit for inventing, but then there are stories of it being before him, and he also got the idea by listening to someone call into a radio station and talking about it. So it was out there, and he's credited with inventing a lot of the clues or noticing the clues. Because again, he didn't invent them; he didn't put them on the record covers. So he noticed these things, like with, and you can see in the back cover of the book, we have McCartney's in the blue coat facing, his back. I mean, it's possible you could do that, but it's interesting. This McCartney's the one they chose to have it. And that was, again, when people were really starting to notice these clues. And of course, if you look at the bass, on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, their most famous album, iconic cover with all the, the pictures of people and so forth. And there's at the bottom, there's a bass that's made out of a funeral wreath.
Yes.
And so it's, I don't know what that means, but it certainly seems like there were lots of clues there people could have noticed. And again, I don't think, I'm not saying this, I don't think this happened. It would have been incredibly, even someone like me who, I listened to John Armstrong's Harvey and Lee theory, that there were two Oswalds from the time they were kids. He's got a lot of evidence for it, but it would take almost something like that, where you found somebody that was an exact duplicate and kind of kept them for some reason, because it's, why would rock stars die all the time? I mean, from Buddy Holly and all the people, even during that era, that died. And I don't think it ever occurred to anybody to replace them with a duplicate. So it's an interesting theory, and people are still talking about it.
I just want to, if I might, I want to just share a little bit of the foreword here by Jude Sutherland Kessler. You mentioned her, and she's the author of the Lennon series. And do you mind if I read a little bit here?
No, of course. Please.
Okay, she writes, in their book, The Walrus Was Ringo, noted authors Alan Clayson and Spencer Lee wryly comment, quote, a habit of reading hidden meanings in record grooves left the runway when the music of certain pop stars was elevated from ephemera to holy writ. This was, of course, during the time that Roy Orbison called the crazy late 60s, when it got real weird. Politics, music, fashion. Everything went crazy, sort of. A classic example was the man who was so obsessed with analyzing Bob Dylan lyrics in order to prove that Dylan's stimulant intake affected his muse, that the researcher placed a wanted advertisement in a New York underground magazine for a Dylan urine sample. So that really kind of sums it up, doesn't it? That people imbue so much meaning in these musical artists. I don't know.
And Jude is talking there about A.J. Weberman, who I've communicated with several times, and very, I'm not sure how sane he is, but he's an interesting character. And he was the first garbologist, and he was obsessed with Dylan to the extent that he was going through his trash, and he still is. He's my Facebook friend, and some of the stuff he's written, I mean, he just comes up with calling Dylan a Holocaust denier, just ridiculous stuff that has no basis in reality, but he's obsessed with the guy. But he also co-wrote a very good book on the JFK assassination coup d'etat in America with the late Michael Canfield. So he kind of that's why I had an interest in him, because he's from that world as well. So
Right.
there are other people like that that kind of have different interests, but yeah, and certainly Dylan, for someone I was a huge Dylan fan, even bigger than the Beatles. When I became sophisticated enough, I really gravitated to him. And as an aspiring poet and writer and songwriter, I just, was obsessed with his lyrics myself. So I could understand people trying to think, what was he talking about there? At midnight, all the agents and the superhuman crew and heart attack machines and, Desolation Row alone, just listening to that, it's like, it really, warmed the cockles of the young conspiracy theorist's heart.
Yes.
So I can understand why people do. And the same, and with the Beatles, of course, you had it was a little bit on a different level because they weren't writing those kinds of lyrics. I don't think, not to that
They weren't
level.
political. No, not at all.
No. But so, I mean, Lennon became, but once Lennon became, I think he became the focus of, but it's interesting that it was Paul, because most of the people that, that they started this rumor about, but yeah, so that's why, we wanted to do the book, because we think that there's still interest in it. We'll see. Hopefully there is. And certainly we got a lot of people that are renowned in some way in music and entertainment that were interested enough to answer our questions.
From Strawberry Fields to Abbey Road, a Billy Shears story. Donald Jeffries, co-authored by Bob Wilson. Just explain the Billy Shears reference, if you could.
Well, Billy Shears is the guy, and again, he's I think also known as William Campbell. He's usually referred to by people as fake Paul. So they call him Paul, not Fall. They say, look at the difference between, look at Paul's ears versus Fall's ears, and they'll analyze these photographs. Very similar again to the way people analyze photographs of Lee Harvey Oswald. It reminded me of that. Very subtle little differences that if you look at anything close enough, maybe you can see it. But Billy Shears was his name, and of course, Billy Shears is is mentioned in the lyrics of Sgt. Pepper, and it's basically saying it's Ringo, basically in the lyrics. So I don't know if you believe the theory. The idea was that it's hiding in plain sight. They decided to tell you, hey, we're going to throw his name out there. That's how obvious we're getting. But I don't. And there, of course, there are people that I think you've seen. We didn't go into that in the book, but I've seen videos that talk about whoever Fall is, Billy Shears, William Campbell, that people went to his house because he's alive, and asked him, and he supposedly kind of gave really odd grin, and just so I don't know, because but he doesn't look like the guy that's McCartney now. So if that's Billy Shears, I don't. It's got a lot of intricacies to the theory, and like all theories, they don't necessarily explain everything, because I don't know who that guy was. That's clearly not McCartney. Or the fake McCartney, if you're saying that, but it's got a lot of elements to it, and that's, generally speaking, is what they refer to. That's the guy who replaced him, and supposedly, I think initially their explanation was he was the winner of a McCartney lookalike contest, and if that's the case, yeah, I could see why he won. I don't think you could get anybody that could look more like him than he does.
Don, we'll take a quick time out, come back, and continue to discuss the legend of Paul is dead. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Serrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.